started, I want to welcome everybody to our third installment of Friday office hours. Thank you for joining in and number one, for sending in your questions, right? So we've had that question portal open, and we've been getting lots of great submissions through there to give us some material to present to you all. And then, of course, everyone on here are agents. And so they're getting a number of calls into their local county offices on a regular basis. So our main intention for these office hours is just to let you all know kind of what those seasonal questions are, things that we're seeing a lot of, hearing a lot of at this time, and give you some ideas on what might be going on, what are some recommendations for, how to correct some of these issues, and just good recommendations and suggestions in general. So we will get started. So we're going to start off this morning. If you've never been with us, let me tell you that we're going to cover 4 different areas. We're going to talk about fruits. We're going to talk about veggies. We're going to talk about turf, and then touch on some ornamental horticulture, which includes, trees, shrubs, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to spend about 10-15 minutes in each area and then transition. So that's kind of how this session goes along. So I just want to thank y'all again for being here. And I think our hosts for our fruit section today are going to be Seth and Melody, and I think Greg's going to pitch in where needed. So we will just get started with that. So I'm going to kind of be our moderator, if you will, and throw some questions out there. These are ones that were sent in ahead of time. I thought this one would be a great thing to address right now because we're seeing a lot of it everywhere. It says, I have found clear sap on my peaches and amber sap on the trunk, but no holes. They're not seeing any holes. So what would you all's thoughts be on that? Or maybe where do they need to be looking for holes if they think it might be? What do you think it is?
That's definitely.
Go ahead, Lucas.
I was going to say Greg would probably be great at answering that.
And also by saying usually, and that ooze that they're seeing is usually an indirect process that the tree's doing from any environmental stress. Sometimes it's called what we like to say gummosis, and that can be just caused from indirectly from any wounds or cankers. So it could be the fact that the tree might be having a disease infestation or an insect infestation, or just simply environmental stress. I had one person reach out to me earlier this week actually about gummosis, and we figured out that the tree was planted a little too deeply, and you could see some of the roots starting to girdle itself and essentially choke itself, and causing some stress that way. And unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do, but you'll see the gummosis process afterwards. Greg, did you want to chime in on anything?
No, I would tend to agree with that as well. And, sometimes it can be associated, if you start seeing it on fruit and such, then you're looking at maybe other diseases like brown rot and others that may be coming in and moving in. But if you're not seeing any boring damage or anything like that, then the gummosis would be what I would tend to lean towards as well. The other thing is sometimes I would ask, is it an area side of trunk that maybe gets a lot of direct sunlight? Because if you get really a lot of heating up of that bark, I can, I've seen it almost to the point like bacterial wetwood disease, where those sugars actually will heat and ferment. They will erupt from the bark tissue of that, and you'll see them weeping down the sides of that. And that's just a product of a lot of direct sunlight to that particular area of the trunk.
Hey, and one more thing, and Seth, you may want to touch on this a little bit too. I was actually on a site visit this morning in an orchard, and it's I can't ever say that word, plum curculio weevil. So we see that a lot in probably more specifically, I guess, about a week after flowers have started blooming. But if you're having a lot of fruit drop and you're actually seeing some of that sappy, gummy substance ooze from that fruit itself, that could be that, because we actually witnessed a little bit of that this morning. So you may want to speak to the curculio, Seth.
Yeah, so that's a insect that is actually a weevil-like insect, and there's a few insecticides that we recommend if the infestation levels are getting pretty high. Usually that involves captan and with a mixture for malathion. So it has that fungicide and that insecticide in addition to it. But organically, we can use spinosad. Usually that's more used on the oriental fruit moth. But if you're trying to hit all those potential pests there, it could help with the plum curculio as well. But yeah, that bonide malathion is probably what we would recommend at high infestation levels. And just also cultural practices. If you're seeing the oozing on any branches and starting to see any of that bacterial infection build up on some areas of the tree, good cultural practices to prune and remove that source of inoculum that could potentially cause further damage later on. So it's always good to see the symptoms develop and ways to correct it for the future.
You know, one thing I would add to just what Seth said was, you know, particularly with peaches, but as we move on into the season with other fruits, sanitation at the end of the season, don't just walk away from it. And if you've got those mummified fruits or a lot of that fruit litter on the ground, to get that stuff cleaned up and disposed of. You know, most of the time, if we're going to see insect damage, obviously you'll see the insect holes, whether it be the plum curculio or our peach tree borers at the base of that trunk where you're seeing those weeping. But pay attention to your sanitation. The season doesn't end whenever you just get that fruit picked. So really stay up on your game. The other thing that I would tell those of you that start noticing things, keep a log and a journal of when you saw these past problems. In the future, be on the lookout and just record all those successes as well as those failures, so you don't duplicate failures, but you can duplicate successes with your spray and pest control programs.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. So what I'm hearing is if you're seeing that weeping, that sapping, that gummosis, and you're not seeing any borer holes, then that is due to some type of environmental stressor. And the main thing for them to do is try to determine what is causing the stress and try to alleviate it, whether it's drought or, you know, improper planting, et cetera, et cetera. Is that?
And sometimes weed eaters, mechanical
so-
damage is real.
Yeah. Right. So sometimes there's not a thing you can do about it and you just let it weep, right? All right. Okay. So next question that I know that we get a lot at the extension office, I'm sure you as homeowners come across occasionally. We have pecan trees. You know, we have beloved pecan trees, right? Everybody loves those. That they have been on, in this particular situation, they've been on the property for about 50 years. So they're established, been producing. And it says that they remember it bearing 9 pecans one year. They literally got out there and counted. It had 9 pecans and has not produced pecans since then. They are wondering, you know, what are some possible causes of this? Is there anything that they can do to help it bear pecans again? Or should they just, I mean, you know, they're not going to cut it down. It's providing shade and other things, I'm sure, but we want to get those nuts if we can. So what are y'all's thoughts on that? Pecans.
I think the key here is that it's a singular tree, therefore it's not producing. You're going to need multiple trees for them to cross-pollinate and produce nuts.
So maybe in the past, there was another pecan tree somewhere nearby that's no longer there, because I mean, the way they worded it to me seemed like it had produced pecans before, if it's 50 years old, and then never since. So maybe that other pecan tree is gone. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, we touched on this during our last office hours as well, and I remember bringing up a few issues, and there could be a lot that could be the result of decline of production, and like Melody said, having those different cultivars that can cross-pollinate, and within pecans specifically, there's the type 1 and type 2 bloom classes. So it's always important to kind of look into what varieties you have. But sometimes you kind of inherited this tree and you might not know that exact variety, and that's completely fine too. But just care and maintenance. So definitely, as your extension agent, get that soil test done and follow those recommendations based on what that fertilizer is calling for. A lot of times just simple fertility issues are just the main reason here. So not enough zinc or nitrogen will reduce that production, and that's a huge factor. And it takes time to build that up. Another reason we talked about was the alternate pecan production. So sometimes you can have on and off years. And again, that is mostly due to inadequate fertilization too. So another one, I'm still looking through my notes from that April one too, is that early defoliation from last fall can cause very limited crop production the following year. So it's always important to note the condition of your tree going into each year. Greg, is there anything that you recall from us talking about that pecan production last year that you want to add to this?
No, I think Melody just hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, that's it.
It's pollination.
Yep.
Pecans have to be cross-pollinated, and first thing I'd look at, you're just not getting good pollination.
Yeah, and maybe even if it had good pollination before and that individual did have a lot of different individual trees to help with cross-pollination, excessive rain during those bloom events can prevent pollination as well. And those unpollinated fruiting structures will just fall and not necessarily get a good crop for you that year. So good points.
And pecans are wind pollinated as opposed to insect pollinated. So if you were looking for a pollinator, another pecan tree needs to be close in the vicinity of the one that you're wanting to have. Kind of like corn, it's wind pollinated.
Excellent. All good points. Thorough answers. So we're going to move on. We've got time for a few more here in the fruit section. So we had a great question about fall and fruit trees. Is fall a good time to plant fruit trees? And if so, where might one find a fruit tree in August, September, October?
Well, first of all, I'll hit on where you can find sources for this, and I'm going to put this in the chat box right now. So make sure that you check that out. It's not just for fruit trees, it's for all small fruit. It's a handy dandy resource, so you may want to go ahead and bookmark that on your computer. So, oh, yours is much smaller than mine there, Seth. Thank you.
You know, typically when it comes to planting trees, and I would kind of defer a little bit to Lucas on this as well, is, you know, generally any deciduous type trees, if I'm going to plant in the fall, I like to plant after the leaf drop. And so that's going to be later in the fall. And sometimes it can be a little bit more challenging to find good tree stocks in the fall of the year. I know most commercial orchards will tell you they love to dig them. My very good friend Sam Kinsey says he loves digging trees in the fall of the year, but typically they never get around to doing it. And so finding fruit stocks in the fall of the year after the leaf drop could be a little bit more challenging. Now, I wouldn't want to put those really late into the winter type years or into the winter where I might have some winter injury. So generally from that, just because of that, a lot of times I'm an early spring type planting, but there is nothing wrong with planting in the fall of the year. I generally recommend after a leaf drop, keep them watered, and but I would wait later in the year rather than really early in the fall of the year. Typically for us, September, October are going to be our two driest months of the year. And so water can be a real issue with those trees, depending upon the size of that tree that you're trying to plant in the fall.
All right, good answers. So I have one more that we're going to throw in here for fruits before we move on to the next section. And it's about pruning care for caneberries at this time of year. So you've got raspberries, got blackberries. Is there anything that people need to be doing to those plantings to spruce them up and get them ready to go into dormancy and be able to do their best next spring?
Well, I would tell you from a sanitation standpoint, all those canes that have actually produced fruit that you've harvested this year that are done, they need to be gone. You need to clean those out, get it all cleaned up. You'll notice if you've got the prima cane berries, they're actually setting fruit and starting to bloom here in the late summer. Those of you in the western part of the state, you may not be experiencing that just because of the heat. In our parts of the area here on the Cumberland Plateau, we'll see a pretty good fruit crop here in the late portions of those that will bear on into frost. So sanitation, cleaning up those canes that's already bared fruit already this year. Along those same lines, there is Philip Mullins put a post in there about thornless blackberries not producing much or not sending up many canes this year. And a couple of things could probably be going on about that. He said that they're about 20 years old. Fruit crops do have a lifespan, and that goes with trees, that goes with caneberries, that goes for blueberries, all the above, that as they really get extended in those years, a lot of times the production of those and vigor of those plants can really decline. And so it may come a point in time to take those out and actually come back in. Over time, there's so many new cultivars that have been developed that a lot of times you can really gain an advantage by going to a new cultivar and taking those out. Now, that's not to say that there still could be some water issues or fertility issues there that may be driving those blackberries to not really put up a lot of new canes this year. But all fruit crops, just like people, have a lifespan over time, and sometimes with those fruit crops, it doesn't hurt to change them out.
And remember too, because Celeste, you said caneberries. Remember, caneberries are going to encompass raspberries and blackberries both, and within raspberries we have red blackberries, black raspberries, even the yellow ones. So each one of these, we're going to maintain these and prune those a little bit different depending on if they're a first year versus any subsequent years. So there's a lot more in detail, or more that we could go into in depth on how to do some of this pruning, but it's going to completely depend on the specific type of caneberry that we're dealing with. So I did plug a publication in there, so make sure to kind of research that out too, just because of those management issues, first year versus subsequent years, and depending on what specific caneberry you're growing.
I would say from a pruning standpoint, fall of the year is not the pruning time. Other than cleaning out those caneberries that are no longer productive, I don't want to be pruning my blueberries and apple trees and others in the fall of the year.
Excellent. Is there anything else that you all would like to add that you feel like is timely and we need to talk about before we move on and hit some of these other areas? Important stuff for fruits in fall. All right. Thanks, y'all. Thank you so much.